Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the Alabama Student Eagles podcast. My name is Brady Johnson, and today we are really excited to be joined by the sitting Alabama Attorney General and candidate for U.S. Senate, Steve Marshall. We're really excited to have him on the podcast today. So, Steve Marshall, thank you so much for joining us.
Brady, it's good to be with you. Thank you for the offer.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited for this. I've got a lot of questions to get to, so we can just go ahead and dive right into this. But I'd love to get started. I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got involved in Alabama politics and what led to you becoming the Alabama Attorney General.
Yeah, it's a wandering story, but I'm an Alabama kid, born in Atmore, raised initially in South Alabama, and then my father worked in sporting goods, and we moved all over the South, and ended up my high school years at North Carolina. Went to the University of North Carolina undergrad, but all of my family is from kind of the Escambia County, Monroe County area, and there was always this pull for me to be able to come back what I felt like was home. And so decided to be able to come back to Alabama for law school, and had the opportunity to work for a really great law firm for a few years in Birmingham. But I'm really the product of the rural South, and that's where I felt the most at home. And really, as I thought about becoming a lawyer, I didn't have lawyers in the family. In fact, I was the first one in my family to go to college. But always saw lawyers as problem solvers and those that kind of tried cases, and that's what I really wanted to be able to do. And so moved up to Marshall County. No real connection for the family, right, with the last name, but had the opportunity to be there for almost 25 years. And it was there that politics began for me, but it was never the intention. At least kind of the way I got into it was it became the local district attorney, and really the impetus for that was a case that I tried that was appointed involving a guy that was charged with attempted murder, and shot him in the back after he lost playing checkers, and not a great case to defend, and we ended up trying that case, and the jury found him not guilty. And I remember thinking in that moment, we all have kind of those seminal moments in our lives in which we sort of pivot. And that was that pivot for me. And I just thought, I really want to be a prosecutor. That's where I think really where God's designed my talents to be, and where my heart is, and the ability to work with law enforcement and victims. And, our local DAs are elected positions, and had the opportunity to be able to serve as the district attorney of Marshall County for almost 16 years. And amazing training. I got a chance to do some really, really fun stuff. And the only way that I would have ever left that job, because I really loved it, was to either be a U.S. attorney or to be the attorney general. And had that opportunity in 2017. In fact, just had my 9-year anniversary as attorney general just this week, which, by the way, you're not supposed to get a 9-year anniversary because you're only supposed to serve for 8 years. But I had finished the 2 years of my predecessor, and so will be, I think, the longest serving attorney general in modern history when it's done. But I tell people all the time, I was kind of an accidental politician in that, I really do. Mark Twain had a really neat saying one time, and that was, the two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you figured out why. And that story I told you was kind of that why moment for me. And very blessed for the 16 years as DA, and now for 9 years as Attorney General, to be able to be a voice for law enforcement and victims and what's going on in criminal justice.
Yes, that's really cool to hear. I think that's a really amazing story. And just kind of piggybacking off of that, I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts on leadership, because we have a lot of students out there who are looking to take leadership in their communities. That's something that Student Eagles is really focusing on right now. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts on how young people especially can look to become better leaders in their communities, better leaders in the state of Alabama, and really try to influence and impact other people's lives for the better. Because you've obviously had a lot of leadership experience in the positions that you've held in statewide office. And so I'd love for you to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, a couple of things I would say is, and going back a little bit to the story I told you, I think everybody's got to figure out their why. What is it that
Yes.
drives them? Where's your passion? Because leadership is not easy. There's a great saying that if you want to be popular, go sell ice cream. And, if you're going to accept the role of a leader, you got to understand that sometimes you have to take positions and not everybody's going to like. You have to do things in stepping out to lead people that sometimes make them uncomfortable and you uncomfortable because you're challenging them to do maybe more than they otherwise would expect. And I really do think, we have to be faith led in that because, that foundation that's going to give you strength in even the most difficult times is going to be fundamentally not in man, but in your faith. And the fact that, you know, Eagles are so grounded in that at an early level, I think is what makes student leaders like you just so profoundly influential, is because you've already identified who you are, not through a position or not through a title, but you've defined it based on your relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I think that is uniquely equipping young Eagles across our state and across our country to really have outsized influence right now on what's going on in our country. And I do think, going back to that why question is, especially early on, is trying to tie yourself into groups, organizations, and people that can not only help mentor you along the way, but for which you really think that you have the opportunity to be able to make a difference. And I tell people a little bit all the time that when I'm sort of crafting a team, is I want to work with people, and my phrase is they're willing to take out the trash, which means that there's no job too small, there's no job too big, that you're willing to embrace the mission of the organization or the entity that you're involved with and be able to fulfill that in whatever role that you can play. And I think some of the most impactful moments are really where you do demonstrate that servant leadership to other people and demonstrate to them that not only do you fundamentally care about the issue or the organization that you're involved with, but also that you're willing to do whatever it takes for that organization to succeed. And I think that sends a message to an awful lot of people that you're passionate about what's going on, that you're serving for far more than simply whatever perks may come with leadership, whatever that may be, but that you're really about what you're trying to accomplish. And that and I was interesting. I was speaking to a group of high school students this week at JSU, and I sort of shared with them that we all understand kind of, and especially in Alabama, what passion is. Sadly, we don't see it as much on Sundays. We do it on Saturdays and Friday nights, right?
Right.
And the hope is that you align yourself with something that you care as much about the wins as you do the losses, because there will be defeats.
Yes.
If you're going to take a position in leadership, there's going to be times where it just doesn't work out in the way that you want it to. But that's also where you and I embrace the fact that God's sovereign, God's in control, and that sometimes it's those incremental steps that get us to the point of where we need to be.
Yes, I love that. I think that's really important. And a lot of what we talk about with our students is the importance of living a meaningful life. And I think a big part of that is the faith issue, which you've been talking about, because having that God centered worldview really gives life a lot of meaning and purpose.
And you have that fundamental foundation. I mean, what
Yes,
scripture teach us about the foundation, and not on shifting sand, right?
that's
But
right.
on a foundation that is stable. And it's from that you can build everything on top.
Yes, and we've really seen the alternative to that, which is the secular worldview and the secular lifestyle in recent decades in this country. And the results have not been great, because you see what happens when you take God out of society. And really, when you remove that foundation, that's when your civilization starts to crumble.
No,
Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
look, it's fundamentally, and it's one of the things that, by the way, I so much appreciate about Eagle Forum right now as an organization, is that they are talking about more so than many the semi-quincentennial and what we can do as individuals, as families, as communities around those fundamental principles that made this the greatest nation in the world, and that we are a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles, that we
Yeah.
developed a document that became the foundation for our country, that is centered on those sort of those pillars. And we in many ways need to revisit that to remind us what this nation is supposed to be about. And it's why when I think about for the fact that now running for Senate, it's really to continue that battle about the core principles of what our country really is, and making sure that we have advocates that are being steadfast in ensuring that you try to place guardrails in the direction that government's trying to go.
Yes, yes. I think that's really important. I love talking about these issues. I think it's really important to talk about these fundamental moral issues that really go back to the Bible and really go back to the American founding. So I think that's great. But you also brought up your Senate campaign, which I wanted to talk to you more about that. So I'd love to hear about some of the issues that you think are currently facing the state of Alabama that you want to focus on if elected senator.
Yeah, one of the unique things I've had a chance to do as Attorney General is to remind the federal government that it's one of limited powers. That's kind of one of those fundamental principles we were just talking about a second ago. And the opportunity to do that from DC, from the inside, is very much a driver. When we talk about sort of this concept of federalism, it sounds like some academic discussion among lawyers and law professors, but it's really the core of what this nation was about. What did Benjamin Franklin say so famously when they left Constitutional Hall, when they asked about, what kind of government do we have? And he said, a republic if we can keep it. It's why there's that continued and constant struggle to be able to stick to the core of what this nation is about. And I think Reagan reminded us too, right, that it's not freedom isn't passed down in our DNA.
Yes.
It's a generational fight, and it's one that's why I'm so excited to see somebody like you that takes a lead on this. Is that it's a generational question, and we're one generation away from being able to lose it. I mean, look what's going on in Europe right now, right? I mean, you see the malaise of a continent as a result of the many policy failures that have gone on in the governments there. We got to fight to make sure that in Alabama and the United States that we are preserving and continuing those things. But now excited about, discreetly being able to help protect our farmers. I mean, that's fundamental to who we are in Alabama. Ag is a huge driver of our economy, but also we know that, within that are kind of principally that the family farm has been the foundation of who we've been as a state for an awful long time. I think it's why we have people that are committed to faith, committed to family, and committed to being able to enrich community. And so our farmers are hurting right now, and they need a champion, and really excited about their support, but also want to make sure that we are kind of living that fight every day when we go to DC. I think, economic security for families is critically important. And when we saw absolutely the failed policies of the Biden administration, we got to make sure that we are very much standing up and getting the government out of the way and ensuring that that American dream remains viable for folks, whether it be just the jobs that are there, home ownership that we have. And look, I think there's a really good discussion going on right now in our country about kind of the nuclear family and the importance of being able to not only have families with children, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
your generation and a little bit older, somehow or another very different. And we got to remind folks again the value of that nuclear family and why it's so critically important. But, excited about really being that conservative warrior that we've been as Attorney General and continuing many of the fights that we've had. Like, I would have never thought as the Attorney General of Alabama, I'd be litigating who's a boy and who's a girl. You and I understand what that
Yeah.
is. It's Genesis 1, right? I mean, it's fundamental. But yet, we followed a radical transgender ideology for a while that really wanted to push back on that. And if you look back to kind of the founding of Eagle Forum itself, one of the core fights was over the ERA, and was proud in my tenure as Attorney General to continue to be able to lead that fight. I could, think that Phyllis would have been proud,
Yeah.
to us, being able to tell Virginia, no, you're not the 38th state, and no, you're not going to make the ERA a part of our Constitution. But if you know much about kind of the constitutional legal fights that take place, if somehow or another the ERA had been ingrained into our Constitution and how some liberal courts want to be able to interpret language, they would have used the ERA as the weaponization to allow for transgenders to be able to participate in girls' sports. We would have had locker rooms with no ability for the integrity of those to be preserved. And, the fight that we've had around gender affirming care would have not been nearly as successful.
Yes. Yes. I definitely agree with that. And I also loved how you brought up the issue of the family, because that is something that's obviously very relevant for young people right now. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about getting young people involved in politics, because I feel like there's really a battle going on right now in our country for the hearts and minds of the next generation. Because if you look at all of these different cultural issues, whether it's the family like you talked about, or socialism, or all of these different cultural issues, they're all targeted at young people specifically. And I think that's why it's really important for students and Gen Zers, people of my generation, to be educated on these issues and to know what they believe and why they believe it. And so I think that's really important.
If you think about it, particularly your generation, they're inundated through social media
Yes.
with all of the influences that go the other way, whether it be, TikTok, whether it be Snapchat, Instagram, like wherever you want to go with it. There is the use of those platforms, and in some ways, I want to say brainwashing of
Yep.
people around ideology. And I think the ability to be grounded in who you are and what you believe gives you the ability to push back on those things.
Yes, yes. And another issue that is really getting a lot of attention from people who are my age, young voters out there, is the issue of abortion. I think that's one of the major issues going on right now in America. And I know that you've done a lot of work on this issue, especially after the repeal of Roe v. Wade in the state of Alabama. But and I know you have very strong pro-life values. And so I'd love to hear maybe what you would say to some people out there who might be conflicted on the issue of abortion. What are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, and look, huge win when Dobbs came around, and it's just so fortunate during my time as Attorney General to have the ability to go into court within hours of that monumental decision coming out, and really kudos to Justice Alito and the crafting of that decision, and be able to get the injunction that Alabama had to protect unborn children lifted. And so, when I look back on my tenure, that's going to be one of the monumental moments that we've had an opportunity to be a part of. But look, I think many young people have never been able to read the history of Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
Understand why it was developed, where it came about, and ultimately what their mission is. And I get a little bit frustrated with this term reproductive health. Abortion is not reproductive health. It is the taking of the innocent lives of children throughout our country, and we need to call it exactly what it is. And I think it is important, particularly for your generation, to completely educate themselves on the abortion economy that has gone on. I mean, look, right now, we have states that are almost abortion tourism states. They're inviting mothers to be able to come in for their abortions in a way that's like they're visiting the beach or the mountains. And, I'm proud that we've also been able to defend many of our pregnancy centers across the country and what they're trying to do to be able to save lives. And so I think part of our fight, frankly, right now is dealing with mifepristone and how it's been able to clandestinely enter states that otherwise say that whether it be surgical abortions or chemical or pharmaceutical abortions are not lawful, and that we're continuing that fight. And we're going to see some more stuff from Alabama here in the next few days about that. But I think fundamentally, number one, going back to what we talked about earlier, grounded in who you are as a matter of faith,
Yes.
and then understanding the ability to refute the lies that are being offered by the left on this issue. I mean, what is incredibly joyful is the fact that as a result of Dobbs, and this, remember, this is a 20 plus year fight to overturn Roe. Um, we were now able to save lives. And it's amazing to hear the stories of mothers now who will talk about kind of what that's meant to them, holding their child in their arms to be able to demonstrate it. But the reality is, you well know, is this battle has not been won, but we are continuing to fight that fight just in a little bit of a different way. But the other thing we have to make sure, and this is one of the reasons why I look forward to being in the United States Senate, is you can't back down or negotiate away the wins. And one of those right now is we can't give up on the Hyde Amendment. That ensures that federal dollars are not going to be spent for abortions. And to the extent that we want, a little bit of healthcare reform in our country, which being discussed in DC, we can't pivot away from the victory we've had in keeping and ensuring that federal dollars are not spent for that purpose. And so,
Yes.
I think we have to be principled in the fight. We have to continue to be able to share, the gospel itself with others, and do that with love and kindness. And I think we have the opportunity to, particularly with your generation, create the reality of what's been the vision for many conservative fighters for many, many years to come.
Yes. Yes. I think that's great. I really appreciate the work you've done on that issue of the pro-life cause specifically. I think that's really important. I want to now touch on a few other hot button topics that are going on right now, because obviously as senator, you would be dealing with a lot of different issues in the country. And so I know that we've got students out there who would love to hear your takes on some of the major issues that are going on right now. So I thought I'd run through a few questions quick and just get some of your thoughts. I think a good one to start with would be the issue of ICE. I know that one has definitely been capturing a lot of people's attentions right now. And so what are your thoughts on the immigration issue? I think you'd be a great person to speak to this, since you've worked as the Alabama Attorney General and you are all about enforcing the laws in our state and in our nation. So what are your thoughts on immigration in general and the ICE debate more specifically?
Yeah, first of all, we're dealing with the failed policies of the Biden administration with an unsecure border with millions of people that came into this country unlawfully. So that's the baseline of what the Trump administration came into day one to have to deal with. I've worked now with ICE for, 25 plus years of my professional life, and men and women who were able to secure individuals that are part of the criminal justice system that needed to be deported and go back home. And, I think it's very interesting if you look at what's taken place in Minnesota versus what's taken place in Alabama and Florida and Louisiana and Georgia and other states where law enforcement has cooperated, where we understand the collaborative role of state and local and federal partners in ensuring that our immigration laws are enforced. And we comply with what federal law requires, which is one of those areas, I talked about federalism before, but one of those areas in which the federal government has supremacy is in the area of immigration. And much of what you saw of the demonstrations in Minnesota was because they would not cooperate as they are required to do with federal officials in turning over those that they were targeting, which had criminal records, were criminal histories, and otherwise were in the jails or the prisons in the state of Minnesota. And so, the good thing is that Alabama has supported our friends in ICE. And look, you can look just in the last couple of days, we had in Mobile 3 people abducted. We have one person now in custody that came into this country unlawfully, has a criminal history, was released by the Biden administration, and now has committed a crime, which, hopefully these 3 individuals are still alive, but at least at this point in time, we don't know. And that's inexcusable. We saw Senator Britt lead the Lake and Riley Act, and I thought that was a nice step forward on the federal side, but very proud of the cooperation that we've had with individuals with ICE, and we'll continue to make sure that we're targeting those offenders that don't need to be here and have clearly not shown their ability to comply with the law.
Yes. You can definitely see a clear difference in the leadership, the Republican leadership in conservative states like Alabama, and then, more Democrat and liberal states like Minnesota.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Brady, aren't we glad Tim Walz isn't our governor, right?
Yes, I know. Exactly.
Let's
Yes.
show
Yeah,
gratitude
right.
for that.
Yes. Well, okay. So another issue that I wanted to get to, something that's actually being debated right now in Congress, is the SAVE Act. And so you probably have some thoughts on this. But obviously, I think, to me, this really seems like a common sense issue. Like, we should have voter ID for anybody who wants to cast a ballot in United States elections. But the Democrats have come out in opposition to this, and it's being debated right now in Congress. So what are your thoughts on the SAVE Act? Should people be required to present an ID when they go to vote?
Yeah, we do it easily here in Alabama. In fact, we litigated that question for a while during my tenure as Attorney General, and courts have said that what Alabama put into place several years ago about photo ID is a legitimate use of state power and authority. And it just makes sense, right? Is that we want to make sure you validate who you are. And the SAVE Act actually will take that one step farther, is that if you're in this country unlawfully, you're not allowed to vote. It's a federal law. Nobody disputes that. But yeah, the Democrats don't want us to have the ability to verify at the time of registration that, in fact, somebody's a United States citizen. And SAVE Act is a very direct way of being able to do that, to ensure that only people that are lawfully allowed to vote can vote. Because look, make no mistake about it, part of the Biden immigration policy was to flood our borders with individuals that would vote with the Democratic Party, to try to shift the balance of an election as a result of their unlawful use of immigration policy. And SAVE Act is going to make sure that that is not allowed to happen and doesn't happen. And we should have passed this already. And right now, I think the House has, and look forward to the Senate being able to do the same thing.
Yes. Yes, that's really important. I think a lot of these issues really just involve going back to the basics and a return to common sense, which I think is really important. And it kind of goes back to, what we were talking about with the faith issue and having that God-centered worldview and that Bible-based worldview, because that really, I think, is the foundation for those common sense values, whether it's enforcing your nation's laws, whether it's standing up for the right to life of the unborn, whether it's supporting traditional family values, all of the things that we've talked about during this podcast. So I think it's really important that we return to those biblical values that were really central to our nation's founding.
Great. Can I just simply say amen? Right? I mean,
Yes.
I
Thank you.
could not have said it any better.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that. I know that we only have a little bit of time left for today, but we covered a lot of really important issues. I think it'd be really good, though, for you to just give a call to action here at the end for students out there and really anybody listening to this right now. What are some practical action steps that you could give to people out there? Maybe they want to get involved. Maybe they want to start taking action in their communities, but they don't know where is a good place to start. So what's your call to action? What are some practical action steps that you could offer to people out there listening right now?
Yeah, I think Student Eagles is one, right? I mean, the work that y'all are doing around multiple issues, and it's amazing when you are able to aggregate people with a voice that aren't hesitant or reticent to be able to discuss it and are knowledgeable about what it is that they're talking about, how you have the opportunity to be able to create very powerful change. I think it's, if we look back on Charlie Kirk's life, one of the reasons why Charlie was so impactful was he was willing to have dialogue with others. He was willing to discuss the issues and the hard questions and do so with a spirit that the First Amendment really allows, which is a safe and appropriate dialogue around the preeminent issues of the day. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for young people to be able to do that in your schools and your universities, is to be able to engage and exercise those First Amendment freedoms that we think are so clear. And then look, we talk about people engaging in politics, but you have the ability to affect public policy in ways other than just simply being an elected official. And I think there are wonderful organizations out there, particularly as folks kind of mature in their lives, to become a part of, in which politics is not for everybody, and it becomes difficult in some ways to be able to do that and balance other interests or obligations in life. But it doesn't mean that you can't volunteer and be a part of organizations that are trying to do really, really wonderful things. And I think, for example, an organization that I do a lot of work with called Alliance Defending Freedom, which is one of the premier organizations in fighting the battles in courts across the country. And I think about, for example, ADF has a scholarship program for law students that are involved. They have a young professionals program of lawyers and families across the country that support that organization. And I think, finding that niche, whatever it may be, because everybody's sort of drawn and driven by, different sort of questions and issues. And there are outlets and opportunities to be able to do that. And I think just getting engaged. And then the other thing, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, old guys like me, right? I mean, we've been around a little while, and there are obviously folks that are younger. But find somebody that you respect, follow them, be able to try to have them be able to mentor, if you will, people along the way. I think is something that's critically important. And one of the things that energizes me as a public official, and look, whether I serve in the United States Senate or I'm done, either way, God's going to take care of what the plan is for me. But what energizes me about the future of this country are the young people, particularly that I've met along the way during my public career. It's why, I look and I want to believe that I've had an impact on what I've done, but I'm even more encouraged about what people like you are going to be able to accomplish, because I do feel like the pendulum had swung very much in a direction that we haven't wanted in this country, particularly from a worldview that you and I share that's grounded in faith. But I think that pendulum has come back this direction. And we have the opportunity now to capture the hearts and minds of Generation X, Generation Alpha, that I understand now we're calling some of our high school students. And look, that's setting the foundation for where we're going in our country. Because, the good thing is we sort of now try to lessen the left's ability to influence through certain social media applications, whether it be through that traditional media that has never been on the conservative side. We're now having opportunities like you're doing right here with your podcast to be able to talk about issues transparently and educate young people about what's going on. And so I think, and it's okay. Just sort of, I guess I'll end with this. It's okay to fail, right? It's okay to kind of have to start and stop again. If my plan had been in place, I was going to be flying jets in the Marine Corps. Maybe that was what I thought I was going to be doing in my life. And apparently you need good depth perception to do that. And so that's why the Marine Corps didn't let me do it. And so because of that, ultimately God put me in a place in Alabama that hopefully we could, draw honor and glory from him in the things that we've done. And so whatever that position is, don't be afraid to figure out where that why is I described earlier, and then to be able to follow it with absolute passion.
Yeah, amen to that. I think going all the way back to something you said at the beginning, it really is about servant leadership. That's really important because a lot of people don't realize that getting involved in politics, running for political office, it really is about serving the people. It's about serving others. That's what it should be about. And so I think that's a really great perspective to have. Don't be afraid to be a servant leader. And while you try to lead others and try to encourage others to take action, it's always important to remember that your primary focus should be on trying to serve the people around you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well said, young man.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming on. Just in closing here, if anybody is interested in supporting you or reaching out, how can they find you? Do you have a website they can go to or any way they can reach out?
Yeah, if they're interested in following what we're doing on the AG front, which I think is a good way to be educated on the issues, it's alabamaag.com or .gov. And so they can see and can sign up actually for our blast of press releases and things that's out there. And on the Senate side, it's stevemarshallforsenate.com. And we're out on X and Instagram and Facebook. And so we're all over the state right now. But man, just you've made my day. Thank you for just the opportunity to be able to share, and man, go do great things.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and it was great to connect with you and be able to have this conversation.
Thank you. It was a treat for me.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. And thank you to everyone for tuning in today. We're really glad that you were able to join us, and we will see you again next time.